we have a special guest today. We have the brother Curt Kennedy. He's another one of the podcasters right here on Wrath and Grace. He actually does the podcast called CrossExamine. It's the one-stop shop for all things hip-hop. I kind of messed that up, but y'all get it. The one-stop shop for all things hip-hop. I think that's how they say it. But anyway, man, he's a good brother, and I love to hear his perspective when it comes to these things. So I hit him up. I said, yo, Curt, can you be on the episode, man? We would love to hear from you. And, yeah, he showed some love, and he's on with us. Curt, you out there?
Yeah, I'm here, man. What's good?
What's up, man? Hey, I thought it was cool, man, that we're addressing this situation, and you guys are going to be addressing the situation on your next episode, right?
Yeah, I feel like, man, everybody's addressing this situation right now.
Yeah.
For the good or the bad, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah. So it's cool that they can hear different perspectives right here in the basement. We deal with the theology, thoughts, and life. It's a little bit different perspective, and I'm sure you guys will touch on it this Friday from more of a hip-hop standpoint.
Yeah, so we do a show called, we sister, we family. So y'all with the Wrath and Grace Network as well. So yeah, we do a show called CrossExamine, and it drops every Friday. And ours is, we talk about culture, Christ, hip-hop. We'll get into theological things, but we get into a lot, but our angle is coming from more of a hip-hop, culture perspective, because we feel like that's sort of a lane that's missing. So how do we love hip-hop. We grew up in hip-hop. It's the art form that we were drawn to, that we've used to express ourselves in ways to honor the Lord through that vehicle, that genre. And so we bring hip hop into, because it's been such an influential thing in the culture, we use hip hop to help us think through. So that's our podcast. We'll talk about Christ, we'll talk about theology, talk about culture, all these things, but we'll also have an angle of hip hop. So you'll hear that on Friday.
Right. That's what's up, man. So you guys make sure that you tune into that episode. I know that I'll be listening to it. I like to catch you guys' episode, but in the meantime, let's talk about this situation right now. I have a couple questions for you, and you can just be real and answer, even if you don't have what somebody might consider the perfect answer. Just give us your thoughts on it, man. When it comes to this case, like the injustice part of it, the whether it was on accident, on purpose, was it a fair sentencing? What's your thoughts on the case?
Yeah, I think so I want to be careful here, not because I don't like to say what I think, because I want to make sure I don't regurgitate for Friday. But I think here's the thing, man, and I am going to say this on Friday and unpack this even more, or maybe just reiterate what I say here. But I think that it's understandable, man. I understand the outrage. Yeah. So I kind of have this category of, it's understandable, but it's unacceptable. You know what I'm saying? I understand the outrage as a black man, as someone who has, grown up in this country and carry the baggage that you've carried just because you're black, and some of the things that get associated with that even other people who had, like there was a point where the Japanese were, after Pearl Harbor, and they were in prison camps on the West Coast, but then eventually they would have said the same things that black people can say now, or say back in Jim Crow back then, but they didn't have the stigma of hundreds of years of being seen a certain way. So I understand the outrage over the forgiveness of it, but I also think it's unacceptable in light of, if you're a believer. It's unacceptable if you're a believer. If you're not a Christian, then I get it. I get that it doesn't make sense on some level. But even then, though, I don't think it's possible for you to be alive and not have had to forgive someone extensively. I don't care if every person, you had to forgive your parents for something, your siblings, your friends, you had to be forgiven. There's no one alive that's made in the image of God that hasn't had to extend forgiveness to other people just to be able to function in society. So on one level, it's understandable, the outrage, but it's unacceptable in terms of if you're a believer, because the foundation of a lot of what we do is forgiveness.
Right. So let me ask you this then. What is your thoughts on the response of Botham's brother and maybe even some of his family towards Amber?
Yeah, man. So, this goes into a deeper thing for me in terms of what I think the Lord is doing bigger picture. And if you've heard me on CrossExamine season 1, or if you heard, I'm an artist myself. My last project was called The Appendix. And I really get into a lot of the race relations in the church on that project and try to bring a balance. I'm not one who's in any camp. I pride myself on being sort of able to see good and bad on both sides of these arguments. And I think the deeper issue for me is I feel like the church, particularly, I don't know where you guys are theologically, but my sense is that you're in the Reform camp, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So I feel like in the Reform camp, I think I've been Reformed 20 years. And so within the Reform camp, I would say 2018 was the first time that I felt like the reality of loving one another was a part of the significance of what it means to be Reformed. Like for most of my Reformed life, it's been theology, it's been justification, it's been sanctification, it's been election, it's been the tulip, it's been a lot of these things, but the simple just loving your neighbor. Matthew 7:12, whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them, for this fulfills the law and the prophets. That's not something that Reformed theology talks about. And because of that, and I'm going to say this because I feel like y'all might be able to understand this, and this is the kind of, y'all come from the same sort of theological framework. I feel like what's happened is somehow in the Reformed camp, we've basically put Paul on the cross and not Jesus. Let me explain what I mean. In the Reformed camp, we look to Paul's letters for how we live. We look to Jesus for what he did on the cross. But when it talks about how we live day to day, we run to Paul. Paul is our guy. He's our savior. He's our theologian. We get into Paul's letters and we talk about what is the church and this and that, and we lose the simplicity of what Jesus said about just loving one another. And not that Paul doesn't have that, but Paul is explaining some other things based on a foundation that you already have. And I feel like in the Reformed camp, we've elevated Paul so much because the foundation of Reformation theology is Martin Luther, the justification by faith, Romans 1:16 and 17. I feel like we still act like we're at Wittenberg's door and we haven't been able to really move on and deal with what are we dealing with right now. So I'm saying all this to say, what I think the Lord is doing is exposing the lovelessness within the church, but particularly in the Reformed church, and using someone like Botham Jean's desire to forgive someone else, desire to forgive them. God is showing that that dude didn't say nothing theological, unless you consider, love theological, which it is, but he wasn't there trying to be. He just said, look, first of all, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not even representing my family right now. I think God is showing that he still cares about good old-fashioned love, and that actually, and think about this, that's what's going viral. Theology isn't going viral. Justification by faith isn't going viral. Election isn't going, all these things that love is going viral. And so when I think about what he did, I think it was a beautiful display of the gospel in the standpoint of I'm willing to forgive, loving my enemies, blessing those who curse you. I mean, for him to say, like, I don't even want you to go to prison. I don't even want you to get locked up. And again, he's representing himself, which is an important distinction. And we can talk about that depending on what your questions are. That's an important distinction, man. He said, I'm representing myself. But I thought it was a beautiful display. And I think I was saddened by some of the response, particularly from Black Christians, talking about stuff like Black forgiveness, which is what the title of our show is called.
Yeah.
becoming terminology that's racialized in this situation, which I thought was very interesting. So I think the Lord is doing something really significant in other ways, and including this one with Kanye, even with Ellen going viral on kindness.
Yeah.
Her I don't know if y'all hit that, but that whole George Bush clip, and she's talking about being kind to everyone. Like, look at what the Lord is doing. Like, and this is what people are talking about. It's going viral, and the simple things like love, kindness, mercy, forgiveness. These are all the foundations of Christianity. Yeah. And yet you got the church and they're arguing over it. It's a fascinating thing to me, man.
Yeah, that's good, man. And we're definitely gonna get into a little bit of that stuff later on in this episode. I love some of the things that you brought up today. And we're gonna have to really dive deep. Los, did you want to piggyback or ask anything from that standpoint right there of the case and everything?
Well, I'm curious to hear from Curt, like as a pastor, locally speaking, like in your context, like have you had to deal with this in your congregation? Some of the reactions or how people have felt with situations like this, and how did you deal with it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, I have. So I'm a pastor 11 years. I'm at a church called Solid Rock Church, just outside of Washington, D.C., in PG County. I've been there 11 years. I've been the lead pastor there for 5. We planted a church 5 years ago. The guy who was the then lead pastor planted, and then I took over the church. And so I've been the lead pastor there for 5 years. And right when I took over in 2014, we were in the midst of Ferguson. And so I did a message once they announced in November. So I took over as lead pastor October of 2014. Ferguson started in August of 2014. When they announced in November of 2014 that the officer was not going to be charged, people were just upset. And my church is very diverse. So my church has white, black, Hispanic, but it's largely white and black, very, very good mix. We have Hispanics and a few Asians. So there is a sense where there's a diversity in our church that I feel I didn't cause it, I didn't create it, but I feel a responsibility to steward it. Right. So when that Ferguson happened, I remember I had to do a message called "Faith is Greater Than Ferguson," and because I'm able to critique both sides of it, I don't come off as like, okay, white people listen up, or black people, y'all just social justice warriors. Nah, like there's things that need to be said to both sides. And so I've been able to, by the grace of God, stay in that lane where I see things on both sides. Like I'm not in anyone's camp, but I try to understand what people are feeling. So yeah, man, we had to do it for that a couple I've had to do it when Trump won the election. I did a message called "Who Did You Vote For?" There were people in my church that were like, if anybody here that's white voted for Trump, they were offended. And then white people would be like, well, what, is Hillary better? Whatever. So I had to get after that. Like, okay, I did a message called "Who Did You Vote For?" And so I've had to deal with this just to steward the church. But one of our values, man, is our first value is love one another. That's one of our first values. So it's something that, yeah, man, I just don't think, especially if you have a church that's diverse, I think you can't escape it, man. I think you have to. I don't deal with it just to talk about it. When I think it's affecting my church, I do it. Like I had to talk about the John MacArthur social justice statement and all of that, and I just explained what's happening here because people are understanding and it's affecting our church, and I had to bring some perspective to that, man. So I will definitely speak to it, especially when I feel like this is going to affect the unity that I feel like the Lord's given us.
All right, amen.